In the quiet hours of forgotten history, there is a tale whispered only by wind and stone, and mystery so gently unsettling that it lingers like a cold breath on the back of your neck. And tonight, in this soft, slow-spoken ASMR story, we will drift together through its shadows. Imagine high mountains, ancient and unmoving, their peaks disappearing into pale clouds, and nestled deep between these ridges hidden from the world, there once lay a village so small and so remote that most maps never bothered to mark its name. Locals, when they still remembered it, called it Anvarar, word meaning the place where echoes rest, and perhaps that name was more literal than anyone knew. Because the strangest thing about this village was the silence that protected it. Travelers who approached claimed that their footsteps began fading long before they reached the first house, as if the earth itself was swallowing every sound. Birds refused to sing there. The river ran without a murmur, and even the wind seemed to move differently, sliding quietly round corners instead of howling through them. For generations, Anvar existed peacefully, its people simple and warm, living in wooden homes built from dark cedar and stone taken from the mountain spine. They herded goats, tended small gardens, and lit oil lamps at dusk so the valley glowed with flickering amber lights. But then came the night when everything changed, our night when one final silence, far deeper than the usual calm, settled over Anvar, and by the next sunrise, every inhabitant had vanished completely. Tonight, as you breathe slowly and let your body relax, we'll travel deeper into that mystery, unfolding clues one by one, gently, softly, the way an archivist turned fragile pages in a candlelit room. The first record we have comes from a merchant named Cillian, who visited Anvar once every season, bringing cloth, salt, and iron tools from distant markets. In his diary, preserved in a monastery library, he wrote that the path to the village felt unusually cold that particular morning, though the season was early autumn. As he approached, he noticed something strange. Normally, by dawn, the villagers would already be outside, tending fires or feeding animals. Yet on that day, there was no movement at all. The village seemed asleep. Cillian dismounted, tied his mule, and walked through the entrance path, expecting children to peek from behind wooden fences or dogs to bark in recognition. But none came. He knocked gently on doors, calling out names he knew by heart, but his voice seemed to dissolve into the air, as if muffled by something unseen. He later wrote that it felt like speaking inside a dream. And then he opened the first door. Inside, the house was perfectly tidy. Bowls still filled with dried herbs sat on a table. A pot of soup, long cold, remained hanging over the fireplace. Bed sheets were slightly wrinkled, as if someone had just risen from them hours earlier. But not a single person was there. He moved from house to house, his heart tightening with each one. The village had not been abandoned, it had been interrupted. In one home, he found a chair that had been knocked over, but there were no signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints, nothing. It was as if the people had simply stood up and walked into the darkness, leaving behind every tool, every garment, every memory. Celine eventually reached the village square, where a stone well stood at the center. A rope hung from its wooden beam, but the bucket was missing. When he peered inside, he found the bucket sitting at the bottom, as if someone had dropped it rather than pulled it up. The rope was not cut. It was cleanly frayed, like something had burned through it without leaving scorch marks. Trying to calm his growing fear, Celine called out again, but his voice was swallowed by silence so quickly that he felt dizzy. Even his breathing sounded wrong, as if echoes were being devoured before they could form. Finally, he turned and fled, leaving the village behind. It took him days to convince local authorities to investigate, and when they finally assembled a small search party, they discovered that the silence round the village had deepened, becoming almost physical, pressing against their ears like underwater pressure. They searched every house, every trail, every rocky outcrop round the valley, but found no tracks, no belongings that suggested anyone had left voluntarily. Even the goats were gone, though their wooden pens were unbroken and their feet still sat untouched. One investigator described the disappearance as a soft erasure, as though the village had been erased with the gentlest possible hand. For weeks, stories spread across nearby towns, and scholars traveled to examine the place. A group of monks noted that the silence was not merely an absence of sound, it was structured, patterned, like a presence. They claimed that if you stood very still near the well at dusk, you could hear faint vibrations, like distant humming just below the threshold of perception. Others disagreed, insisting that the mountain valley simply had unusual acoustics, though none could explain why the silence had become stronger only after the villagers disappeared. But perhaps the most intriguing account came from an elderly shepherd named Rule, who said he saw a strange column of pale light rising from the valley on the night of the disappearance. According to him, the light did not flicker or move, it remained perfectly still, glowing softly like the moon filtered through fog. He said the air trembled like heated metal, yet he felt no warmth. When questioned, he repeated only one sentence. The mountain woke up. Most dismissed him as a man too familiar with solitude. But some scholars collected his statement with great seriousness. Ancient manuscripts from that region spoke of hollow mountains, places where sound traveled differently because vast underground caverns lay beneath the earth. Some texts even mention rituals performed to appease the stillness, though none explain what that stillness represented. Centuries passed, and Invar became a myth, a whisper shared by travelers and storytellers. The forest slowly reclaimed the homes. Roots split the wooden beams, moss crept over rooftops, and the stone well eroded into a ring of crumbling rock. But the silence remained. Modern researchers eventually attempted to locate the site, but the coordinates in the old maps were contradictory. Some expeditions reported hearing the uncanny quiet long before reaching any physical ruins, while others found only empty valleys with normal winds and birdsong. It was as if the village existed only when it wanted to. And then, in the early 1900s, a journal surfaced written by a man named Elias Torvain, an explorer who claimed to have rediscovered Envar. His handwriting was shaky, and many pages were water damaged. But the surviving entries describe the same impossible silence, the same abandoned homes. And something more. Elias wrote that on his second night in the village, he lit a lantern inside an old house. As the flame flickered, he began to hear faint footsteps outside. They were slow, deliberate, and impossibly soft, like someone walking on thick snow. When he opened the door, no one was there. But the footsteps continued, circling the house, always just beyond the edge of the lantern's light. He tried calling out, but his voice vanished instantly, devoured by the silence. The footsteps stopped only at dawn. On the final legible page of the journal, Elias wrote a single line: "The village is not empty." No further entries were found. Whether he fled or joined the fate of the villagers remains unknown. Some theories claim that Envar sits above a rare geological formation that absorbs sound, creating hallucinations and disorientation. Others believe the villagers encountered a natural phenomenon so unusual that modern science has still not identified it. And then there are the myths, those old, half-forgotten legends collected by monks centuries ago. One speaks of a spirit that feeds on echoes, a presence that awakens every 1,000 years. Another describes a valley where those who speak are taken by the quiet. Whether these stories were born from Anvarar, or whether Anvarar became trapped inside them, no one can say. What we do know is this: silence, true silence, is never empty. It hums with possibility. It waits. And sometimes, very rarely, it takes. As you lie here now, breathing slowly, letting your muscles loosen, and your mind drift gently toward sleep, imagine walking through that forgotten village under the soft glow of moonlight. You pass open doors and touched balls of herbs, abandoned lanterns, and the old stone well still standing watch. The air is cool. The night is calm. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth or beyond the veil of what we understand, something listens. Not with malice, not with hunger, just with presence. The silence wraps around you like a blanket, soft and heavy. Yet you are safe here, protected by distance, by time, by the boundary between story and reality. Let the stillness soothe you. Let your breath slow. Let the quiet settle into your bones. For the mystery of Anvarar, like all deep mysteries, is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to whisper to you, gently, that the world is wider, stranger, and more beautiful than we often remember. And as you drift into sleep, imagine the first rays of dawn touching that silent valley, illuminating the empty village once more, and revealing nothing but peace. The people are gone, yes, taken by a silence older than memory, but their story remains, soft and endless, echoing only in the minds of those who listen. And tonight, you listened, now rest, and let the silence carry you into dreams.